For today for geometry, we're going to talk about triangles. Remember, triangles are those three-sided closed polygon figure. And most of you are probably familiar with an equilateral triangle. That's the one you grew up with. That was the perfect little triangle and each side was exactly the same side. Well, triangles can be classified, categorized, or named two different ways. The first way we're going to talk about is by the angle. Since we just finished learning about angles, we know angles are a part of a circle. Complete circle is 360 degrees. A triangle is part of a square or rectangle. So all three angles on a triangle add up to 180 degrees because two triangles put together will make a square or a rectangle. It's important to remember that. So let's go with the most common triangle that we pretty much grew up with. It looks similar to that. So as triangles are categorized by their angles, triangles have three angles, three sides, and each one of those angles is less than 90 degrees. And we know angles less than 90 are acute. So this is called an acute triangle. So every one of those angles are less than 90. Then, if you remember angles, that other big one, and here's the angle right here, which the angle is much greater than 90 degrees. So we're calling this an obtuse triangle. Only one of the angles can be obtuse because it's greater than 90. So we know all three sides have to add up to 180, so I can only have one obtuse, one greater than 90 angle. So this is an obtuse triangle. And then there's one other triangle. And let's make that a little bit better. Ooh. Generally, you will see that little square in that corner. That little square is just like when we're talking about lines. That tells you that it's a right angle. This here is 90 degrees. 90 degrees is signified by that little box. So this is called a right triangle. So triangles can be categorized by their angles. Each one of the three angles is less than 90, so it's an acute triangle. All I need is one angle that's bigger than 90, and it's an obtuse triangle. And lastly, if I have that 90 degrees or that corner of my paper, that right angle, it's a right triangle. So they can be categorized by their angles. Triangle. Tri means three angles, three angles. So that's by the degrees. So we can give triangles a name by the type of angle: acute, obtuse, and right triangle. There's also another way we can group or categorize angles, and that's by their sides. Remember, triangles have three sides. Tri means three. So let's go back to the ever familiar triangle that we grew up with, where every one of these sides is exactly the same or equal. And that's signified by this little line, or it's called a hash mark. That little line tells me this side, and this side are congruent. They're exactly the same, they're equal. So if we're going to classify it by the sides, it's called an equilateral triangle. That means all sides are equal. So that's an equilateral triangle. And then I have one that's, I'm going to do it this way because this is how I generally like to introduce it or think about it, because then it's easy to remember. And this one has two sides. Those two sides are equal. They're congruent. They're both the same. So if you look at that, it kind of looks like something, how I remember it, is an icicle that hangs down in the winter from roofs. So this is called an isosceles triangle. Isosceles means there's two sides that are equal or congruent. So we have our equilateral. All three sides are congruent. They're equal. Or we have two of them. Two sides are equal, congruent. Isosceles. I like to remember it like an icicle. And it can also be this way too. Remember, triangles can be in any direction. So we have equilateral and we have isosceles. And then we have this other type of triangle that doesn't fit any patterns. And, whoops, let's make it like this. Because this way, I can distinctly see that none of the sides are the same. Every single side is a different length. There's no little hash marks to tell me any side is congruent. So I'm calling that, when every side is different, that's a scalene triangle. And I like to remember it by, when you step on the scale, there's a lot of different numbers. So every side is different. Every angle's different. This is scalene. Scalene triangle. None of the sides are congruent. If every side is congruent, equilateral. Two sides, isosceles. None of the sides, scalene. So I could look at these and I can label them by their sides, or I could label them by their angle. So I'm going to look at this one, and by my sides, it's an equilateral. And look at, if I'm going by my angles, it's also called, each angle's less than 90. So it's an acute triangle. I'm looking at this one. This looks less than 90. That looks less than 90. That looks less than 90. So this one's also acute. And then when I get to the scalene, I'm looking here, and this looks, if I put my paper in there, because it looks pretty close, it's a good check. Oh, nope, that's a little bit more than 90. So this would be scalene or an obtuse triangle. So those triangles can have two different names. They can be labeled by their sides, and then they would be equilateral, isosceles, or scalene. Remember, those hash marks tell me congruent, tell me exactly the same. Three sides, all the same, equal, equilateral. Two sides the same, isosceles. No sides the same, scalene. So that's sides, and then the angles. The angles are the same thing. Less than 90, acute. One bigger than 90, obtuse. And then we also can have the right triangle. So it pretty much goes with lines, with angles, geometry, it's all connected. When we connect those lines and angles and we close it in, it becomes a polygon. A triangle is a type of polygon. And here we've classified them by their angles and by their sides.